Really good. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
We're just talking about Britpop as befits men of a certain age.
Yeah.
Britpop. Oh,
Britpop is like a popular genre of music from the 90s.
yeah. I remember when
Mhm.
Blur tried their hand at like in a more American sound, I think is what they were doing, or Song 2.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then that got me to look into their earlier stuff, which I like much more. I was like, yeah. Um, that
Yeah.
Boys Who Want Girls Who Want, that was kind of a novelty song. But I took the electronic music aspect of that seriously. I thought it was very good. And then I was a
Mm.
little surprised to hear the rest of their stuff wasn't much like that, but it's still good. Yeah, so yeah, it's been a while. We talked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So
I
what is it? It's like about 12:30 over there, is it?
Yeah. So what's the vibe and
So yeah, I mean, when the meeting with Zelensky happened, there was a lot of alarm, I think, in reaction to that kind of news that Trump wasn't gonna, kind of support Ukraine really. I think it was expected, but still to hear it confirmed was kind of alarming to many people, I think. So,
what is going on with the refugee situation? I think I asked you that before, and it had dramatically slowed down since, early 23. But
yeah, yeah. I mean, most of the people who are going to come have already come. Some of them went on to Germany or other countries, but many have stayed. Um, even men, sometimes, and they've kind of integrated more or less well, I would say. But some of the Poles, I think, are kind of a bit maybe losing patience with some of the Ukrainians because there are, a contingent, a minority who kind of just want to sponge off the native population a bit. But I wouldn't say that's the general case. It's not true of all of them, but there is a minority which behaves like that. Yeah.
I think you can tell a Ukrainian, like how different do they look to Polish people?
Oh, you can't really tell by looking, but you can tell from the accent usually. Like when I go to this, there's a chain of shops called Biedronka in Poland, which means ladybird. Yeah, this company actually comes from Portugal, but they have employed a lot of Ukrainians. And when you're at the checkout, and just interacting with the checkout woman, sometimes you hear, okay, that's a Ukrainian. Yeah. You
yeah,
can just hear it. Yeah, even
I mean
it's
they're
in
both
Polish, yeah, but you can hear it. Yeah.
uh, Slavic, right? I mean largely Polish.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They are not, not a million miles away from each other in terms of, ethnicity and
Yeah,
culture, but there is a difference, yeah. Um, and yeah, you can hear it. You can't really see it, I think. Maybe the Poles can see it. I don't know. I can't, but I can
yeah.
hear the difference.
If you
Yeah.
spend too much time on Twitter, one might think that your ability to figure out someone by the shape of their skull or something, you have more powers than you
Right,
really
right.
have.
Yes, the
But
physiognomy. Yes, the,
yeah,
the fine art of physiognomy. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there is that game that the Lindy Man has been live streaming, like
Uh-huh.
hbd.gg or something.
It's a game.
So
Oh.
GeoGuessr, where it
Oh,
shows you like
yeah.
a Google Maps thing. Well, you can
Hmm.
do that with people now, and you can guess where they come
Oh,
from, and that's
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could. I don't know what kind of handicap I would get, right? Like if I get the general part, if I say like Asia Minor or something, is that specific enough?
I
Near
mean,
East.
I actually think if it's Slavic, they would probably give you quite a wide
Right.
area. They
Yeah, you're
wouldn't.
like,
They
well,
wouldn't
they look Ukrainian to
specify
me.
it.
Well, actually, Czech. Well, okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've watched 2 films today:
Right.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Tombstone and The
I didn't do
French
the homework.
Connection.
I didn't do the homework. And
So I
all
hope
involves
everyone is
watching movies and
fully
stuff
up
to
to
do.
speed.
Well, which one did you watch?
I watched both of them in different circumstances, but French Connection I hadn't seen before somehow,
Oh,
and
I
it
did
was
see that
one
a
of the
long time
best
ago.
films I've seen for like years. Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
love it.
I actually saw that in like some kind of kind of retro movie revival thing in Daly City, south of San Francisco, on some Sunday like 10 years ago. I just looked. I was gonna trying to kill time, and I said, "Oh, look, I'll go check that out." I never saw it, so it's cool to see it in the theater.
I imagine
Sort
it's
of,
amazing in the theater, but yeah, so
yeah.
yeah.
And then the sequel, I think I might have mentioned this in the chat. The sequel was sort of very despairing. It seemed, I don't think it was as acclaimed as the first, but yeah, like some kind of, I think he's in France or something or in Europe somewhere, and then the second one, and some kind of drug kingpin gets Gene Hackman addicted to heroin just to make it go through withdrawals and stuff. It's pretty vicious, but yeah,
So maybe we could, for the benefit of listeners, we could explain why we watched these films. So we decided to talk a bit about Gene Hackman and Val Kilmer,
yeah,
right?
Rest in
So
peace.
yes, indeed. Two, I don't know, beloved actors, I would say. Just recently deceased, of course, sadly. Maybe Gene Hackman we could discuss first. My favorite film of his by a long way, I guess, is The Conversation, which is actually one of my all-time favorites, really, in the whole, cinematic world. I remember first seeing it with my dad when I was 17. And I can remember the circumstances quite well because
well,
my mum was actually.
that wasn't when the movie came out. You're not that old.
No,
Yeah.
it was actually 20 years, exactly 20 years after the film came out. Yeah.
Okay.
And he said he saw
92.
it, he read it in the Radio Times. And my mum wasn't there because she was sick. I remember she was in having a stay in hospital. So my dad had to cope with dealing with me, and I think he decided to cook a curry, and then we decided to watch something. And he found this conversation, in the Radio Times. He said, "Oh, this is good. We should watch this." I said, "Okay." So we settled down to watch it, and yeah, it just really stuck with me afterwards. Some hallucinatory scenes in this film, and Gene Hackman's incredible performance. He's so tense, so wary of everyone around him. Um,
Yeah,
you know, he
I
pulls that
actually
off
did see
brilliantly.
that, but I it sort of washed over me. I think I was too young to appreciate it. It's sort of slow.
Uh,
It's some kind of audio engineering drama is kind of what I got from it. And it took place in San Francisco. Um, but he wasn't like a CIA person or something. Was he some kind of private investigator? Well, professional wire,
yeah,
I would assume.
he had his own company, right? He had one kind of subordinate who he sort of abused a bit, really.
Yeah, that actor who
um,
was in Dog Day Afternoon, among other things.
yeah. This actor is rather odd looking. I can't remember his name now, but
Yeah, speaking of physiognomy, he had kind of a large forehead. I remember that.
yeah, yeah. This is what people
John
remember
something.
him for. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I wish I could remember his name, but yeah, this was Francis Ford Coppola, of course. Coppola was having an incredible decade,
right.
from Godfather to Apocalypse Now. Kind of one of the, I don't know, one of the greatest runs in cinema history, really, I think.
Yeah,
Um, And this film came out at the same time as the whole Watergate scandal basically came to an end in '74 after rumbling on for several years, I think. Um, and it came out as well at the same time as the same year, really, as the Parallax View, which is in some ways similar,
Warren
also
Beatty,
about
also
conspiracy. Yeah, Warren Beatty, and
it. I know it
and
ends. I know it ends. I think there's some famous climactic scene in Seattle. So in that sense, it's also a West Coast U.S.
oh,
movie.
that's where it begins,
Well, it
actually.
begins there.
Yeah, yeah,
It
it
seems so. It
begins.
seems so climatic. I
Um,
mean, toward the end.
right. Yeah, there's this assassination on the Space Needle in Parallax View of I think he's running is a senator for running for president. Yeah, and Warren Beatty is there, and so is another. He's not actually at the top of the needle, as he doesn't get admitted access, but he's got an old girlfriend who's a journalist, and she sees this killing. Um, anyway, but that's by the by. Let's go back to Gene Hackman.
Has
I
one
mean,
of the great
yeah.
sequences, Parallax View, a
Hmm.
brainwashing sequence that lasts like
Oh yeah.
5 minutes, 7 minutes,
Hmm.
in which he kind of gets, goes deep undercover undercover to try and find out who is trying to murder politicians, and gets brainwashed with a sequence of photographs that are
Hmm.
famous photographs, Dorothea Lange's photos of motherhood and like the depression and all these. I really want someone to write a blog post, possibly me, which like itemizes all the photographs in that sequence and try to work it out. And yeah, the intellectual montage of associating like motherhood with this set of brutal images, and then country, and it's just such a wonderful scene. But both
Hmm.
of those scenes, I think, Parallax View and the conversation I learnt about through Slavoj Zizek's Pervert's Guide to Cinema, in which I think, well, definitely with the conversation, he goes to this scene with the flushing the toilet,
Hmm.
and the great horror of what happens when that which is supposed to go down,
Mm.
other things come up, like
The
deeply.
blood,
You
yes,
know,
isn't it?
it's
Yeah,
like a
that really
body
struck
part,
me.
right? Like,
I remember
Um,
seeing like a video of that book by him, not reading it, which I guess is sort of appropriate in a way.
I think
And I
it's a TV series or a film.
right, right. And I remember I saw Zizek speaking on the Children of Men DVD commentary. That was interesting. But yeah, how would
The
the
sad loss of the DVD commentary.
yeah. It's
yeah,
funny that it's funny
definitely.
thinking about the way technology changes. You know that blockbuster comedy Tropic Thunder. You know they had these sort of it could be called topical thunder in a way with all the references to DVD commentary and uh, these sort of truisms about what sort of format audiovisual format takes off, having something to do with porn proliferation. It's all very 2000s kind of conversations. But yeah, DVD commentary now that's kind of gone by the wayside.
But for me,
Yes.
Gene Hackman, to go back, I don't know if this with you, Paul, but my first encounter was Superman 2 or
Yeah,
Superman 1.
yeah,
Lex Luthor.
that was
Yeah.
mine too. Yeah, which makes sense for someone born around the time I was, and the very blockbuster nature of Superman, going to be widely seen, of course. That was my first introduction. Lex Luthor, yeah. And then yeah, he was in the Superman 4, which was terribly panned. He was not in 3.
Yeah.
And
Because Hackman was pretty good in comedies, I think, as well. I mean, he's in Royal Tenenbaums, right?
yeah, the
And that's
Birdcage,
considered
the
one of his
remake.
best performances, I think. He
Yeah,
was
One of his
he had the
final.
talent for comedy as well as for these very intense dramas like The Conversation. Yeah,
yeah,
he had great range.
Mississippi
Hmm.
Burning was good. That was one of the kind of serious adult films. Not adult film
Hmm.
like that, but
Right, right.
adult just dramatic tension, that sort of adult. And there was a movie not a lot of people have seen called Narrow Margin. sort of Hitchcockian in its approach to suspense, and not just because it takes place on a train, but yeah, he's sort of protecting some kind of witness to a crime, and they're taking a train ride through the Rockies. Someone's on the train chasing them, and he has to sort of help hide this woman. Thought that was very good.
I think I might have seen that, but it rings a bell.
Yeah,
That, I saw something funny about, somebody said about Hackman a couple of weeks after he died, I think on Twitter, that he was an actor who looked 50 years old for 30 years. So,
Mm.
and
yeah.
there was something about like that about him. It's hard to picture him young, really.
Now we have actors who look
Um,
30 for 50 years, or
right? Yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny because yeah, it's when you so I think of a movie, one of the later Gene Hackman, Enemy of the State. Not really a great movie, but kind of entertaining. And yeah, he looks older than he did in the conversation there, but it took like over 20 years to detect it, some sort of
yeah. I think it's his hairline, isn't it? He's got this kind of mysterious hairline,
yeah,
which it's sort of
But it's
stuck
very
in one
striking.
place. Yeah,
It's very striking that everyone in the French Connection looks old, and they all look like real men. They've all been exposed to kind of too much testosterone in the same way that we've been exposed to too much
yeah,
estrogen.
right.
And like the whole thing of watching Tombstone and French Connection just made me think of masculinity all the time, and like what it means to be a man. Like Gene Hackman in that film has never done the cleaning, like clearly never hoovered, never washed
yeah.
up. Um,
There's a lot
like
of that, like this kind of grizzled detective type. But there's still, to some unsuccessful young man today who won't clean his room, it's not the same, buddy, because typically these guys, they have ex-wives, they've got kids, maybe they're estranged, but they've lived like men in a way that kind of gives them permission to live in a kind of a squalid apartment. And plus they've got they've got jobs, they've got tough jobs that require
well, I could just
certain body
think of
parts.
that mathematical formula. Um, what is it like? Hard men create good times. Good times
Right.
create weak
Hmm.
men. Weak men create hard times, and then hard
Yeah,
times create good men.
Right.
some
Pardon me.
kind of
Anyway, you know the one. You know the one.
Spenglerian, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but we are, yeah, like I guess they were coming out of the Second World War, the privations. They hadn't quite had this big baby boom, economic boom at the same time. And
Yeah,
I don't know how much talk about Parallax View and things like that, but like I feel like it's a universe in which hippie culture doesn't exist, the sexual revolution doesn't quite exist. It's not a libertarian universe, and I mean it is based on a true story. So I don't know how far back the documentary evidence for this story goes, but I suspect it was kind of like early '60s rather than late '60s.
oh, so you're saying that the Parallax View, given the time it was released, we should have seen like kind of more
Or the
cold-blooded.
French Connection, sorry,
Oh,
French
yeah.
Connection.
Oh, French
Yeah,
Connection.
Parallax
Yeah.
View, I guess, is intimately tied up with that kind of
Well, French
paranoia
Connection
of
was
post JFK.
so the kind of hippie vibe and ethos. As much as American history begins from the East Coast and moves to the West, it was more kind of a West Coast thing percolating. So in like 1971 or 72 in New York City, especially in the unglamorous parts of it, like Queens somewhere, I wouldn't be surprised to see lack of evidence of any kind of hippie turn or aesthetic.
Yeah, well, this is when Donald Trump was buying up land and building his first. I don't know if you saw that film, The
I
Apprentice.
did,
It like
yeah, yeah, pretty
um,
good.
that kind of equally grimy thing where he's taking on the city council and the entrenched, bureaucracy of New York.
Yeah, that movie was, well, I mean, of course it's controversial because, it's about Trump, but yeah, the guy who plays Ray Cohn in that, kind of an early
Jeremy Strong.
riser, he sort of groomed Trump back when the word groom didn't have all the connotations it has now. And anyway, it was apparently this movie, The Apprentice, was kind of his baby, and he said, it was kind of hard to get people to watch it. People felt it was sort of glamorizing, no matter what his approach, kind of glamorizing Trump. And I thought it was interesting how they depict Trump in that movie as being both crass and but also strangely totally uninterested in drugs and sex. I mean, except sex with one woman at a time, a good-looking woman. But there was so much hedonism going on around him, and he's just kind of, wasn't particularly interested in partaking. He drinks milk.
I haven't seen the Apprentice film, but one thing that strikes me about Conversation is the soundtrack, the music, which is partly a bit of a sort of borrows a bit from Psycho, I think. But also, you've got this very avant-garde kind of noise, really often, like in this murder scene, where you've just got this really aggressive kind of oppressive screeching noise. It's a bit like in Psycho, but it's more intense, and it uses various kind of avant-garde noise in different
Like
parts of the film.
musique concrete or something like that, or
Yeah, and
atonal.
this was a thing at that time. If you watch, for example, the Andromeda Strain, that has a soundtrack by I think it's Gil Mele, is that his name? He was some electronic musician, and it's really kind of avant-garde. It's you wouldn't think, oh, this is a Hollywood movie. It's a really kind of out there soundtrack. And you also, even if you watch, like, early episodes of Columbo, you find this, right? It was a thing in the early 70s, going into the mid 70s. Also, you find it in Apocalypse Now, actually, in the 79. They have these kind of Moog synthesizers creating this kind of stabbing, disturbing soundtrack.
I know
I
a lot of television, in the early 70s and maybe through the mid 70s was still doing this kind of freak out jazz things.
Right.
You'd hear a lot.
That's another thing. Yeah, you find that in Giallos, as well. Like Ennio Morricone's scores for like Dario Argento's films. Very weird and kind of unsettling.
In comparison, French Connection is fairly standard to that, but it is an incredible jazz soundtrack and these kind of deep double bass lines with the it did make me want to look up the jazz composer, which is a sign of, I think it's like someone called Colin Ellis.
Yeah, around that time, like this kind of jazz was very sound of the city, and
you get that Taxi Driver soundtrack in '76 which is by Bernard Herrmann, right? Like, so Bernard Herrmann had taken his Psycho, more orchestral thing and then embraced jazz.
Right. Yeah. I think there was a lot more, adventurous sort of experimentation going on with soundtracks in the 70s. And now I don't know what's going on with soundtracks at all. They seem to be very kind of conservative in the sense that it's just standard orchestral music.
Well, this is what I got from Tombstone, which has an awful like Danny Elfman style orchestral soundtrack, and it's not even
Val Kilmer Tombstone.
Yeah, the Val Kilmer Tombstone.
Well, that's the only one as far as I know. But yeah, right.
It's a good film, it's good.
Danny
but
Elfman, that seems wildly inappropriate. There's nothing Tim Burton-esque.
The first half hour of that film, I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I'm well into this. And then I think it descends into a few more cliches, but the performances are great. But it really, I was talking about masculinity and patriarchal values. Like, you can start to see that kind of 90s, like Gen X pointlessness, hedonism come about there. It's slightly camp, and even Kurt Russell, who's quite a macho guy, has this it's like kind of like foppish early grunge haircut, which I don't know if is historically accurate.
I think it was based on the real Wyatt Earp, actually. Yeah. He was
Yeah,
a
that's
kind
because
of
grunge,
proto grunge
to the degree
star.
that grunge just sort of represents not caring, I could see I could see the grunge style recurring over and over again.
Well, they have got very smart moustaches, to be fair. But
Right,
apart
yeah,
from the moustaches, everything is.
yeah, the mustache is highly non-grunge. Yeah,
Um,
Yeah, I know Kilmer though. Val Kilmer was very fond of this role, and he often referred to it. I mean, I started reading his memoir, which he published like 5 years ago, and it's called "I'm Your Huckleberry." That line from the film, which is,
yeah,
I think he says it twice, um, and it's become a sort of famous line. And yeah, I like his performance in this. It's got that combination of kind of you know. Uh, tragedy and just absurdity. This character, like he says, they're one of these cowboys they are fighting against. Says something like, you're drunk, and he says, "Oh, I've got two guns, one for each of you." He's seeing double. So he delivers it really well. I think Kilmer's actually. You can if you can watch him in Top Secret. He was actually pretty good at comedy. Yeah, he's pretty amusing in it.
yeah. That was like his
Um,
breakout role, wasn't it? Top Secret.
yeah, yeah, Top Secret
I
is.
remember Real Genius much better. And it was like a right after that.
I don't think I've seen it, but I'm intending to watch it.
It ends
But
with
yeah,
a house, you know, with runaway popcorn being generated. The
right,
popcorn machine is just
right,
so much somehow that it's flooding out of the house and into the street. And the Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World is playing. It was brand
yeah.
new at a time. And
What was with that trope, in the 80s with the kid genius thing? There was there's so many films about that, right?
I know, right?
It's like weird science, the War
Yeah.
Games is kind of about that with Matthew Broderick's
There was a movie
hacky.
called My Science Project, which is sort of like a knockoff. Well, it's not fair to call it a knockoff. Weird. Well, no, I think it is fair actually. And I remember, yeah, someone invents a way of, moving through time or bringing things from the past into the modern
Hmm.
day or something. And so, yeah, there's this thing going on then. There was a movie called Daryl too about a little
yep,
android boy,
Yeah.
and
that's it.
Daryl was an acronym. Digital android something or other. Uh,
It was a
and
real obsession, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well,
I think Home Alone even has this. Yeah.
it's
right,
setting us
Yeah.
up for nerd culture. This is,
yeah.
going away from, someone that can use their physical strength and just, use their nerd abilities. And look at here we are, we're all spending all our time on
Yeah.
computers now.
Well, the
Like,
rise of the personal computer and all that made that very salient for people, and they're saying like there's this kind of person that is a whiz, and they're just sitting in their bedroom doing cool stuff on this machine that is more than a typewriter, and it's not a TV, and yeah,
I'm sure it was just a formula as well that they stumbled on, that okay, we can flatter the teenage boys, in the audience that they can identify with this genius, and say,
I,
oh, he's just like me, right? So
yeah, like
I
some sort
distinctly
of
remember when,
idiot savant or I don't know, things like that were being explored. And the 90s, of course, had full-blown depiction of people with mental handicaps who are otherwise sort of creative and ingenious in different ways, or were much more capable in a mundane sense than people think, at least.
Rain Man, what were you
Right,
thinking?
Rain Man was sort of a predecessor to the 90s and very early 2000s. Nell, I Am Sam. There's a movie called The Other Sister with Giovanni Ribisi and Juliette Lewis playing, special needs type. They become like lovers, very adorable.
I
But
think
do you think we can do this kind of pattern matching across years? Because, there's obviously a zeitgeist feeling, when we think back to like what was the 90s like. But yeah, I don't know how much that's just our own personal memories of what cinema was like. Like, I think the reason I hadn't watched Tombstone at all is because I think I got exposed to Back to the Future 3, early on, and like the Western just seemed like such a terrible genre. And I think I associated it with like that kind of boomer and older generation that would spend every Sunday afternoon watching a Western as
Yeah,
a way of like,
John Wayne, Death Valley Days, and all that stuff. And that was
or war
Coppola.
movies. And again, it comes back to my idea of like masculinity being represented. So the boomers, which like didn't ever fight in anything, right? Like they, had the most comfortable.
Vietnam. I mean Vietnam. But they're like kind of the last to. I mean, yeah. When people dump on boomers, I have to remind them. Well, I mean, some of them were drafted and stuff. Did you see Born on the Fourth of July? I mean, maybe that guy doesn't count as a boomer. He might have been silent generation, and maybe more of them were actually.
We didn't have Vietnam in the UK, but
Right.
we.
That's a
Didn't
very
come
good
over
point.
the
Very
Atlantic,
good
did
point.
it? It was a bit like, but yeah, there
Good
was a
point.
real Western revival in the early '90s. Yeah, maybe it was kickstarted by, Dances with Wolves and
Yeah,
Back to the Future Part 3. That kind of, that's both 1990, I think. And then you had
yeah.
the Unforgiven, you had
Unforgiven
Tombstone.
was
There
good.
was a film about called Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner, I think.
Yeah.
Those
Wild
two films
Wild
came out
West.
about the same time. Actually, it was kind of like two films about Wyatt Earp. You could, which one do you want to watch? Yeah.
And don't
Um,
forget Bad Girls with Megan.
right. Who could forget that one?
The
That's
Coyote Ugly meets Unforgiven or something.
yeah. I mean, I think the '80s you didn't see too many westerns to do. It was kind of a bit of a fallow period for westerns. The '80s.
Yeah, you had Young Guns. That was a very minor arc. That was the Young Guns 2 had the cool John Bon Jovi song. I remember buying the cassette tape. You know, uh, but yeah,
Right. But this is
Silverado.
very stylized, wasn't it? That Young Guns, I think, kind
80s
of like
80s was doing a
yeah.
kind of synthetic materials cyber thing. Also coincident with the rise of the PC and cool new military tech and yeah.
Famously, they did Westworld in like what 1980 or something. Like Westworld, the Yul Brynner one
Oh
where he
yeah,
plays a robot within a Wild West theme
I
park.
think it's even earlier, wasn't it?
yeah.
It's like the
That
70s
actually confused me.
sometime.
I thought that was a Western for a long time. And
Right.
in so I mean I know that yeah, 70s was not well, I mean, you had Clint Eastwood Westerns, but I feel that was sort of like kind of a holdover from the 60s, still kind of 70s were
Today,
definitely Western oriented
Stuart
movies.
Lee, Stuart Lee in the Guardian or the Observer was writing about Sam Peckinpah.
Right. Wild Bunch,
Who
example.
is it? Is it? It's not Wild Bunch. It was like one in 1971, which was his like maligned Western.
Oh, right.
What would that be? Anyway, he was talking about that, and I briefly scanned the article, but um, again, like I don't know why it doesn't fit like the Western. Like it was such a huge success, and it represented. I mean, even in that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that came out a couple of years ago, you could see it was on TV. Long John. What was it like a Silver? Not Long John Silver. The Hi Ho Silver, whatever.
Zorro.
Um, Zorro. Like
Zorro.
I grew up with it as a
Yeah,
TV
Zorro.
thing rather than a film
Lone
thing.
Ranger. Lone Ranger.
Lone Ranger.
Yeah.
I seem to
Zorro
remember
was
there
like
was
a
that
Zorro was Spanish or Portuguese, wasn't he?
Heaven's Gate, wasn't it? Wasn't it Heaven's Gate was like a huge bomb, and then that kind of closed down the Western genre, I think, for years, basically.
Heaven's Gate. I've,
Was
I've
that?
never even heard of
Yeah,
that. I've heard of the cult.
that was that
Michael
was
Cimino,
yeah,
the
yeah.
guy who
He
did The Deer Hunter.
right. He
Oh,
followed it up with Heaven's Gate, and it was kind of notoriously, uh, a huge production, which bombed. Um,
yeah. The
yeah, and
70s
after
was
that,
you could make really grim and ambitious films that were also big commercial successes. The Deer Hunter. My God, I mean, who? That's no one's idea of a good time at the movies, but it was just the Apocalypse Now. Maybe came out around the same time. You could say, well, it was quite the spectacle, and there's still action, but Deer Hunter is just really grim.
How does America process this loss in Vietnam? And I think those films, Apocalypse Now and Deer Hunter, it's like
Yeah.
allowing, the self-image of the nation to move on, maybe.
Yeah, and boy, did it move on by the time they got to the Rambo sequel. The first Rambo was somewhat acclaimed. It did have a kind of, action cinematic aspect that, most people can appreciate, but It he just sold himself out completely by the second one.
Well,
Where
the second one is directed by the guy who did Tombstone. That's the
oh, it is
connection.
Rambo 2.
Yeah,
Rambo
Yeah,
First Blood Part 2, right? That's the
right. He goes back to Vietnam, right, to release POWs, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. And it's
So
kind of like
it's
winning
like
the war, again, or something, or trying
right.
to
It
win the
was
war
the
which
problem
was
was they
lost.
didn't let us win it, rather than
Yeah,
not be
yeah,
there to begin with.
that's
Right.
right.
The first one is a little ambiguous. You might think the lesson was we should have never have been there. But the second one, it seems to be that they've settled on. It was good to be there, but you really really let us should have unleashed 100%, not maybe.
Right.
first
That kind
one
of
dedicated to the brave fighters of the Mujahideen, right? That's
Yes,
right,
and the
right. The
third one, oh
third one.
boy,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that was nuts. I watched that one recently. Just to, there's this scene where he's literally sort of breaking bread with these mujahideen, and he's playing games with them. Some game where like a polo, but you drag the carcass of a sheep or something like that, and it's just supposed to really just kind of tug at your heartstrings. Their desire for independence and freedom, and they pretty much keep it that vague.
With those Vietnam movies, late 70s, I think, they sort of changed I don't know, the genre of the military or war movie. And then in the 80s, there's this kind of push with things like Top Gun to kind of make it possible to return to this kind of patriotic movie, military movie where we don't think too much about how bad war is,
Yeah,
because Val Kilmer was there in is one of his most famous roles as Iceman.
yeah,
And if you watch Top Gun, and it is kind of silly. I mean, Kilmer actually said it was silly. He thought it was silly. When he read the script, he thought, "Well, I'm not doing this." But he was contractually obliged to appear in a action movie. Yeah, so he had to do it. But he said that once he saw the screen, the first screening of it, private screening, he realized it's going to be a hit. You've got a hit on your hands. Yeah, and
yeah. It's kind of a standard bearer for the time. Like it's just really really well made. I mean, it does look old now, but for a long time it didn't look particularly old.
it's,
Um,
it's a classic sort of Reaganite entertainment, isn't it? What the sort of
yeah,
leftists have
Die Hard
classed
is
as
Die Hard's kind of
Reaganite
a standard
entertainment.
bearer in that way. Die Hard is an 80s
Mm.
action film that looks more like a 90s action film. Whereas,
Right.
but I don't want, I have a problem of leaping around too much different things, but uh,
I mean, we're just go back to Top Gun. Like
yeah,
Tony Scott, who directed it, came from an advertising background, and I think he's one of the kind of archetypal '80s figures. It's like that kind of. So when Martin Amis wrote Money about an advertising director who goes into movies, I think it's like based on Ridley Scott and Tony Scott, kind of, but just embracing the zeitgeist, allowing it to flow through you and not kind of like have any kind of artistic pretensions, really, right? Like you can't tell a Tony Scott movie. We've gone away from the auteur period. I mean, yeah, which is kind of the reason I like 70s film, this kind of Friedkin era where you could just because Friedkin wrote the book. Who wrote that book about like raging bulls and this kind of this anyway, like that kind of period of early 70s cinema in America, which allowed just this astonishing independentish violence, and yeah, I love,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, and often kind of unsettling and disturbing themes. I mean, I like the 70s best as well, but if you look at Top Gun and you talk about the sort of Reaganite entertainment, as it's called, I think there was a deliberate push against that kind of cerebral cinema, you know, and that questioning cinema, where sort of aspects of American life are seriously questioned, like in Taxi Driver, for example. Um,
yeah,
in the 80s, I think the Reagan administration and the sort of conservative movement at the time, it was so strong, so powerful that it was able to sort of dictate what films were made, that by the studios, big budget films were made. And and I think there was a deliberate push against you know, the more cerebral type cinema. But you can see, like, say, Platoon, which came out in '86, same year as Top Gun, and it's much more sort of this kind of left wing, you know, protest movie, where it's an interesting battle in the '80s, yeah, between the sort of left people like Oliver Stone, who was trying to keep this critique going, yeah,
Yeah.
from Apocalypse Now, from Deer Hunter, and so on.